Yes,
So,
yes, no one else. It's very, very exclusive.
exactly.
VIP.
Yes.
So let's jump right into it. So we're going to talk about anger, shame, hate. These are things that a lot of people either experience directly themselves or they've come in contact with it. So I guess my first question to you is, what are some of the impacts of anger, shame, and hate?
Well, let me refrain what you said. Not a lot of people feel them. Every single person feels those feelings, whether they acknowledge them or not. Because every human has anger, every human struggles with shame, and every human struggles with hate. A lot of people struggle with self hate, which is actually shame. So those are not differing things. And there's no shame in feeling any of those feelings. Those are emotions that all humans have. Well, shame is not technically an emotion, it's a feeling, but they are just normal, natural human feelings. The difference is between them is that anger and hatred are there for a reason. Um, so babies are born into the world with all the emotions, the full gamut, including anger and including hate. And they're there to give us wisdom. They're there. So just a little bit of background on the hate emotion. So hatred is the same as disgust. We actually feel it the same way in our body. We usually feel it in our gut. That's where most people feel disgust or hatred. And that's where they feel shame because remember, shame is a type of self disgust or self hatred. So we feel it in our gut. And if you are walking with a young child and see roadkill and the child goes, "Ooh, icky," you don't say, "Don't feel that way. Don't say icky. That's wrong." No, you say, "Yes, icky. I like that you are feeling that because that tells you to stay away from that roadkill." And that is why we feel hate or disgust of someone else. It's there to give us like feedback, like stay away from this person. This person is no good. We cannot trust this person. Um, Anger kind of does the same thing where it's not, you stay away from the person. It's more like something's wrong here. Something needs correction. Something needs to happen so that we correct. I likened it unto um, a light on the dashboard of our car saying, check under the hood, something's wrong. So if we can see our anger as that kind of feedback saying, okay, I need to have a boundary. I need to have some assertive speech and say, hey, no, that's not okay. That kind of thing. So that's why we have emotions. Um, Most of the word emotion is the word motion, which is because emotions are there to move us in some way, to move us in some productive, healthy way. We channel those emotions out of our body with healthy actions. But shame is not an emotion because it is not native to humanity. Babies born into the world are not born with shame. Shame is a social construct, and shame only comes from other humans. So, mainly our primary caregivers or attachment figures as children. But shame is learned. And I personally believe that shame is a liar. It's not something to be trusted. It's not something to go, okay, that's valid. And it doesn't teach us anything. It doesn't help us move forward in the world. It doesn't give us wisdom like emotions do. It actually does the opposite. It makes us stuck. It shuts us down. A lot of times we freeze. We don't know what's going on all of a sudden, and it is debilitating.
So you mentioned shame, and I remember a time where the power, let me rephrase that. Shame was used to deter people from doing certain behaviors. There was a
Mm-hmm.
certain, in quotations, power to shame. Some
Mm-hmm.
people say that there was good shame, there was bad shame, and there's maybe shame in between.
Mm-hmm.
You identify it as shame comes from others, which I 100% agree. Do you then believe that, or is it possible that external shame can then manifest itself internally into someone and then they could And that shame can appear in different ways in their life.
So external shame. Yeah, give me an example of what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So someone is shamed to not have children out of wedlock, for example, right?
Mm,
And now what they do is that they live a life because they don't want
mm,
to experience that shame.
mm,
And now when they manifest that external shame into themselves, they view, okay, sex with multiple people, I feel this way about it. Sex with um seeing prostitution or seeing sex workers, I view them this way. They feel ashamed that it's not other people necessarily telling them, but because they could take it from something else as
mm,
children outside marriage and how do you have children sex, they start to see
mm.
it in other areas.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. So there's an association with, in their mind, sex past these certain boundaries that just kind of, it always is shameful in their mind. That makes sense. Yeah. I definitely think so. I guess, when you say that, it makes me think how, yeah, that I think we all do that with lots of things when we're taught those things from our primary attachment figures. So our parents usually. And, the resolution to that would be to start questioning what we were taught by our attachment figures to kind of take our parents off the throne, off the God throne, and say, you know what? They were just human. And they thought that was the way to keep me from having a child out of wedlock. And it makes sense. But man, did it really mess with me. And I don't agree. Do I agree? I don't think I do. And really kind of deconstruct that in our mind and really, and most importantly, just see where that shame came from and kind of give it back to the source in our imagination.
I agree. I agree. Like it's one thing to look at the world and say, okay, certain behaviors will lead to certain outcomes. Right? You analyze it, you can understand. I think what a lot of people, and to your point, is that they're told something, let's say from their parents or a religious figure, someone of a certain stature in their life,
Mm-hmm.
right? Either, let's say, a parental figure, a religious figure, a cultural figure, whatever the case is. And then we take it as the gospel, but then there's that voice inside of us that's like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know about this, right? But the conditioning is so hard for them to break free. What do you think are then some of the obstacles that maybe people face when it comes to questioning some of
Mm-hmm.
the things that they're taught when it comes to shame, when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
hate, when it comes to anger that people maybe struggle with to overcome?
Yeah. So I think it's really important when you say the conditioning, and I agree, that's the right word. We need to go back to when we first kind of appropriated these beliefs. And so I call that, as a therapist, I call that an imprinting memory. So, if little Terrain was taught at age 8 that, you know, it is so shameful to have a child out of wedlock, and he's making all these associations, we need to go to little Terrain at age 8 and that moment actually. And that's not hard to do. It's not hard to go back to even very early imprinting memories. So, what I do, and I do this on my podcast, I lead my listeners through this exercise that I have started doing the last few years with my clients because I want everyone to do this for themselves. I want this exercise, but it's called an integration exercise. And so, what we can do, and I do this for myself today, even. So, when we feel shame, so I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I got into an argument with my daughter. And when I cooled down about an hour later, I sat down in this very comfy chair right now. And I just closed my eyes and I kind of revisited our whole conversation and like what it entailed because I had to kind of unpack it all. It just kind of, went a little haywire. And I realized, okay, I we got in a fight because I could not be in her presence without us talking. And she didn't want to talk. I asked her a few questions. She didn't want to answer them. So I got angry with her. And I realized, oh my God. And so this is what I'm talking about right now is us reflecting. humans really need to reflect. I'm not a big proponent necessarily of meditation, but I am of reflection. We need to reflect on ourselves, especially times we find ourselves triggered where we're not ourselves. We need to reflect on those and unpack them and learn about ourselves. So, anyway, I realized through this reflection, I am so triggered when I am in the presence of another person and it's silent. And I realized that's my trigger. And I put that on her. Like she doesn't want to talk. That is totally fine. But I got mad at her because I was so uncomfortable with that silence. And so I just closed my eyes and I thought about what it felt like to be in her presence and her not talking to me. And I just felt in my body. And so what I felt in my body was in my gut. I felt tension or like a knot. Okay. And again, this is where we feel shame. So when we can start paying attention, reflecting, allowing ourselves to feel what we felt in that moment when we were triggered in some way, we can feel it in, we feel our bodies. And then I kept my eyes closed and I allowed my mind to just float passively back to the earliest time I remember feeling that same sensation. That took me back to age 3 and being around my mom in silence, where she did not talk to me, she didn't look at me, no eye contact. If I spoke, there was no response. And so I then imagine my adult self entering that memory, going to little Bronwyn, getting down on her level, looking her in the eyes and saying, little Bronwyn, I see you and I see how you feel like you don't matter. You feel without eye contact, without talking, you feel like you don't matter, like you're invisible. And I know how much shame that makes you feel because all children naturally conclude the reason their parent isn't paying more attention to them is that there's something defective with them. And I know that you are concluding that this is a you problem. That's why mom doesn't talk to you more. And what I need you to know, little Bronwyn, is what I see today, which is this is not a reflection of a you problem. This is 100% a reflection of a her problem. So we're going to take all the shame that you feel right now and put it in this big cardboard box. And we're going to give it back to her. And we're going to say, here you go, mom. This is your shame, not ours. Because we're realizing that, it's on you to attune to your child and you're not for some reason. And we're just now realizing this isn't our shame. So we're returning to owner. And then I do more, but I'll just kind of leave it there. But basically, this integration exercise we can all do for ourselves, and we will have multiple imprinting memories. But each time we do this kind of exercise, that shame gets dislodged forever from that particular trigger. And if we work through every time we're triggered in the present, it is an opportunity to dislodge shame permanently from our whole being.
Is that then difficult for some people to do, to identify, try to work through it and say, okay, maybe this isn't my to bear, this is someone else's, and I give it back to you?
I have not found that difficult for anyone to do. If you feel uncomfortable giving it back to the parent in this imagination exercise, we can also just throw the box of shame into the middle of the ocean.
Oh yeah, I think that's like a safe place. Let someone else discover that treasure, right? For lack of a better word. Because if I look at
Yeah.
like my life, you mentioned like childhood, and I think so many of our struggles come from our childhood, right?
Oh, yeah.
Especially when they're unresolved. Um, what can someone do then to help them identify what is impacting them from their childhood in their adulthood?
Yeah, so that's how I see triggers as being so beneficial. I know none of us like being triggered. I sure don't. But every time we are, it is an opportunity for us to go back to it. If when we take time to reflect, when we take time to feel it in our body, like an hour or two later, whenever that is, it doesn't have to be an hour or two later, it can be days later. But when we reflect on that, when we allow ourselves to feel what we felt like when that person, you know, we felt humiliated by that person for whatever reason or whatever happened, we can go back to an imprinting memory, and it gives us an opportunity to set the record straight and remove this shame that doesn't belong, that is not native. It's not supposed to be there. And the other thing I was going to say is, it is when we're children usually that this happens, and it's because children have zero objectivity. So if we have a mom who has postpartum depression, the child isn't able to say, "Oh, mom never attunes to me because she's depressed." No, children don't have that objectivity. When we're adults, we can see that